Okay, so hopefully you've drawn a table out, a bit like this one. Along the top here, you can see that you've got the anions, which are the negative ions, and down the side, we've got all the cations or the positive ions. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to put these two ions together in each case, and we're going to see whether we end up with a precipitate or not. If we end up with a precipitate, that's going to tell me the compound that's formed is insoluble, so it does not dissolve. Okay, so the easiest way to do this, and I've already prepared everything, is that you can just basically go through. If there's no precipitate, put an X. If you see a precipitate, put a tick. Okay, so just to let you know about the cations, the cation solutions are all along here. Okay, and you can see that other than the iron one, which has got some colour to it, they're all colourless and there's no precipitate there, and they're all nitrates. So that should give you a little bit of a hint about nitrates, because that's not one that we're particularly going to look at that's on your table. Okay, so for the first one, we're going to have a look at chloride. So for this, I've used 0.2 mol of sodium chloride, so just a normal salt solution, and I'm going to put it with each of those ions which are in that table. Now I've done this already to basically speed up this part for you, so we can have a little look at what we've ended up with. So we've got the chloride and the ammonium, which actually just forms a colourless solution, which you might be able to see better on the black piece of paper there. And we've got the K plus and the chloride again, we've got a colourless solution. So with those, you should be putting an X in those boxes on your table to say there's no precipitate. We've got the same thing here with calcium chloride, which is formed. And we've got the same thing with strontium chloride. So we're getting these lack of precipitates every single time. Okay, magnesium chloride, again, a colourless solution. The iron one has obviously got the colour from before, so this is iron 3+, which gives us this colour, and that's the iron chloride. And again, although it's not colourless, it is a clear solution, so there's no precipitate within that. And then the last one, we've got zinc chloride solution, and again, we've got no precipitate. So clearly, with all of those, with all the chlorides, so that's the first column on your table, no precipitates have been formed. So that should help us with the solubility rules afterwards. So we're going to have a look at the second one, which is the hydroxide. And for this one, I've used sodium hydroxide. Okay, so we've got another colourless solution we're starting with. And let's just have a little look at our results. So I've got ammonium hydroxide, colourless solution, no precipitate. I've got potassium hydroxide, no precipitate. Okay, now with this one, you can probably see it better on the black piece of paper there. There is a precipitate and it's fallen to the bottom. We call this a heavy precipitate. That's formed from the calcium and the hydroxide, something you might be familiar with, which is lime water. So you know that that has stuff floating in it. Okay, so there we've got a precipitate at the bottom. And the same for the strontium one, not quite so much. We've got a little bit at the top, a little bit at the bottom, but we've definitely got a small amount of precipitate formed. Magnesium hydroxide, again, you can clearly see there's some precipitate which has fallen to the bottom. All of these are white precipitates, apart from this one, which is the iron solution, which you can probably see better here. So we've definitely got a precipitate there forming between the iron and the hydroxide. And then the very last one, the zinc hydroxide, again, we've got a heavy precipitate which has fallen to the bottom. Okay, so hopefully you can put all your ticks and your crosses into your table for those. We'll have a look at the third one, which is the carbonate. So for this, I've used sodium carbonate solution. Okay. And if we just have a look at our results, ammonium carbonate, no precipitate. Potassium carbonate, no precipitate. Calcium carbonate, again, a small amount of precipitate at the bottom there. So there's definitely some white precipitate. Strontium carbonate, again, another small amount of precipitate at the bottom. We've got magnesium carbonate, which clearly has formed a precipitate there. And we've got the iron carbonate, which has clearly again formed a precipitate. And then we've got the zinc carbonate, which again, you see it against the black piece of paper. We've definitely got a precipitate there. Okay, so hopefully you can go through and put your ticks and your crosses in for that one. So that's the carbonate done. So just on to the last one, which was sulfate. For that one, I used sodium sulfate solution, another colourless solution. All the sodium ones that I used were colourless, so that might give you a clue about sodium. Here we've got some magnesium sulfate, no precipitate. We've got a colourless solution. For the iron sulfate, we've got the sort of orangey solution again, but there's no precipitate in there, okay? Zinc sulfate, no precipitate. Ammonium sulfate, so that's the one at the top of your table, so there's no precipitate there. Potassium sulfate, no precipitate, nice colourless solution. Calcium sulfate, no precipitate. And then strontium sulfate, the only one there, we've definitely got a white precipitate showing. Okay, so you should be able to fill all those in on your grid. Now, if you have a look at those, you'll clearly be able to see the sort of things which are always soluble, so the things which have got X's on. So if you have a little look at your results now and you go back to the presentation, there's also some questions to help you analyse what's going on and hopefully come up with a small set of solubility rules that you can use.